Psalm 23, continuing there, the whole series that I've been working on, we haven't even gotten to the New Testament yet, but as you know, I've entitled the series, Who is this Jesus? Where we're going to be taking a look at who this Jesus really is. We know all the stories, we've heard the stories from the time that we were kids, but really, who is this Jesus? And as we looked at Psalm 23, we started out by saying, He's my shepherd. And we've talked about the benefits of that. So I'm going to read this, and then we're going to move on. We're going to be looking today at verse 4 in particular, or the last part of verse 4. First part of verse 4. But let's read the entire chapter. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. As we work our way through this popular psalm, I want you to notice a change that takes place. If you take a look at verses 1 through 3, the writer has been talking about the shepherd. He says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He guides me in paths of righteousness. He's been talking about the shepherd. But now in verse 4, there's sort of a transition that takes place. The writer now talks to the shepherd. And he says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? For you are with me. And if you look at that and go through the remainder of the chapter, you see that now he, instead of talking about the shepherd, he's talking to the shepherd. Why is that? Why this transition? There's a lot of people who talk about God. He's oftentimes referred to as the man upstairs. He's referred to as the big guy, or the guy in the sky. There's people that even use his name in profanity. His name is brought into all kinds of things. There's a lot of people who know about God. You know of people who have said, I believe in God. They say that they know that there is a God. But what is it that changes people from talking about God to talking to God? There's something that changes. There's plenty of people that will talk about God. What causes them to talk to God? Well, one of the things that's pointed out here in this particular passage is the valley of the shadow of death. Think about that. The valley of the shadow of death. Approaching death will make a lot of people religious. Some of the most religious places are emergency rooms in hospitals. You'll hear God talked about all over the place in hospitals or in ICUs. People are talking about God. People who have never prayed before talk to God when death is at their door or the door of a loved one. The famous thoughts and prayers are now important and appropriate for some reason. They become real. When somebody dear and close to you is going through the valley of the shadow of death, all of a sudden their religion changes a little bit. They become religious, and God becomes a factor. I don't know if if you look at phones, you'll see when somebody shares a prayer request, you'll see these emojis with praying hands. You know, the emoji that's in the text that shows a praying hand. I was thinking, what kind of emojis do you use when death is at the door? Is it a skull and crossbones? And then praying hands next to it? Is that how you would emoji something like that? Sort of funny, isn't it? Sort of silly. But that's how people handle prayer. That's how people handle death. That's how people handle this God who is our shepherd. That's how he's acknowledged sometimes. It's at some funerals when Psalm 23 is used to sort of like bring out the pixie dust to make everybody feel good. We're going to recite the Lord's Prayer, and we're going to recite the 23rd Psalm. And it's going to give us a little bit of comfort, but quite honestly, there's no thought to what it really means. Philip Keller, who wrote the book about Psalm 23, I've referred to it several times, is a source that I'm using for the study. He was a shepherd, and he writes from a shepherd's perspective, and he's talking about Psalm 23, and he gives us some great insight concerning this verse. He says this: most of the efficient sheepmen endeavor to take their flocks into distant ranges during summer. This often entails long drives. The sheep move along slowly, feeding as they go, gradually working their way up the mountains behind the receding snow. By late summer, they are well up on the remote alpine meadows above the timberline. With the approach of autumn, early snow settles on the highest ridges, relentlessly forcing the flock to withdraw to lower elevations. Finally, toward the end of the year, as the fall passes, the sheep are driven home to the ranch headquarters where they will spend the winter. It's during this time that the flocks are entirely alone with the shepherd. They've left the home base, they've left the ranch, they've been driven led up through the valleys, up to the mountaintops, to the awesome pasture lands that are up there, and they find themselves alone with the shepherd. They're in close contact with him. They're under his personal attention day and night. The relationship is an intimate relationship where the sheep know their shepherd and they know his voice. It's good for us to remember that all of this is done in the setting of wild mountains and rushing rivers and alpine meadows and high rangelands where there's nothing there to get in the way. David the shepherd knew firsthand about the difficulties and challenges for the sheep. He also knew about the good that awaited them in the high country. Over and over, he would make this trip with his sheep. But before he did it, he knew this country like the back of his hand. He never took his flock to a place that he had not already checked out. David knew what was ahead. David knew what was up above the ridge line. He knew what was there. He knew all about it. And before he would ever take his sheep up there, he knew what they were going to be dealing with, what they were going to be facing. He always went ahead to first check out the high country before ever taking his flock there. He knew all about the dangers of the rampaging rivers from the thawing snow and the potential avalanches that could take place. He knew about the potential rock slides. He knew about the poisonous plants. He knew about the dangers of the various predators that were up in those mountains. He knew about the rain. He knew about the sleet. He knew about the occasional snow that could quite honestly, very easily kill sheep. Nothing took him by surprise. David was surprised. The shepherd was surprised by nothing. He was fully prepared to protect his flock and lead them in difficult situations. Now, I want you to notice that oftentimes, in order to get to the mountaintops, you must go through the valleys first. Through the valleys. Nobody likes to go through the valleys. Every mountain has its valleys. The mountainsides are scarred and they have some deep ravines in them. But the best way to the top of the mountain is always along the valleys. It's always the best way to get to the top. Good shepherds know this, and they know how to lead their flocks gently along. Paths that wind through dark valleys and ultimately lead to the open air at the mountaintop, it's worth it. In the Christian life, we often speak of wanting to move to higher ground with God. We want to move beyond the common crowd and enter into a more intimate walk with God. We want to walk with God. That's what we want to do. As Christians, as we read about the stories of those who walked with God, we desire that. We want to walk with God. We speak of and hear of mountaintop experiences with God from other people, and we want that for ourselves. But all too often, we have this erroneous idea of how this happens. We want to sort of be airlifted up to that mountaintop. We'd like for a helicopter to come along and just lift us and take us up and set us up on the mountaintop. When you go skiing out west, if you had the dough to do it, you can hire a helicopter to take you, instead of going on the chairlifts or having to do anything else, they'll take you up on the mountaintop and drop you off so that you can ski down from the top. That's what we want. The valleys? Climbing to the top? No. No way. We want the mountaintop. Just like it is with the sheep, the only way a Christian is going to gain higher ground is by climbing through the valleys. Now, a couple things to remember about the valley. It's something that we walk through. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Even though I walk through the valley. We don't get stuck there. There's not dead-end streets or cul-de-sacs there. We don't stay there. We don't even linger there. We don't die there. We walk through it. This particular verse is often used to refer to the dark valley of death, used at a lot of funerals. Death is something that is dark. Death is something that is a valley. It's something that can be scary. It's a dark time. Something that Christians, quite honestly, should not fear. But we do. If we're honest, we do. Some of you have sat at the bedside of someone who is going through that valley. And as death approaches the life of a Christian, there is a peace that is inexplicable. You become keenly aware of the presence of God. You become keenly aware that God is doing something. And you come to the realization that the last breath they take here, their very next breath, is in heaven with Jesus. We shouldn't fear that. If we see that as reality, if we understand that this life is something that is temporary, it's not something that should scare us. Your loved one has moved on to the higher ground, has moved on to the mountaintop pasture, like the sheep have. They've gone through the valley, and they've reached the higher ground. For those of us who have been there and have been left here on the earth, there's still a life to live. And unfortunately, that life does have valleys. It's going to have some times of valleys, disappointments and frustrations and discouragements and dark and difficult days that do not need to be disasters. They become valleys along the road to higher ground in our walk with God. It may very well be difficult and hard to understand. As I was thinking about this, I was thinking about the West Virginia Turnpike. I don't know how many of you have ever been on the West Virginia Turnpike, but it is filled with winding roads up and down, going around the valleys of the mountains. My wife hates the West Virginia Turnpike. Scares her to death. Might have something to do with how fast I drive on it, but it's sort of like it's nonstop NASCAR, with the banks and all that kind of stuff. But think about the person, the engineer, who is able to look at that mountain and say, in order to get from here to there, we have to do this and that. We're going to go around and up and down. And as much as my wife hates that road, at the end of that road are our kids in Virginia. Don't like the valley. Don't like going through those curves and those wicked. How many of you ever been going down the road and you see the truck drive-off lane? And you see the tracks going up into the sand on the drive-off lane. I always thought it'd be so cool to see. But I don't think so if I was a driver. But that's what you've got. You're going through the valleys. You're going around the curves. You're going through the ups and downs. But once you get to the other side, you've gotten to where you wanted to go, to what's good. Are you thankful? Are you thankful for the engineers that take you, even in some cases, burrow a tunnel through the mountain? Are you thankful? Are you thankful for those valleys? Are you thankful for the equipment that made those roads? Are you thankful for the valleys? Are you thankful for the difficult days and seasons in life? Is that something that you thank God for? When you thank God for the dark and difficult times, it is then that you are suddenly reminded that He was there with you all along. When you begin to realize that there's no way possible that I could have made my way through this had God not been there, it's then, after you've gone through the valleys, or maybe even sometimes as you're going through the valleys, and you understand that God is right there with you, are you thankful? How can people be thankful as they're going through valleys? And that happens. And when you find yourself in the next valley, the panic is minimized, and your fear gives way to peace and calm and quiet confidence. It's not normal to most people. Not normal at all. Notice also that it is the shadow of death. What do you know about shadows? Yesterday, as we were saying goodbye to our kids from Virginia came down. Our grandson, who's 2 years old, he was standing out in the driveway, and all of a sudden he started jumping like crazy. I thought, what in the world is he doing? He was jumping on his shadow. His dad's nuts. His dad's he's not a camp ice. My daughter's camp ice. He's something else. He's inbred our grandson to where he's jumping on a shadow. I don't get it, but we'll work on that. But he was jumping on a shadow. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but the shadow of a dog cannot bite you. The dog can bite you, but the shadow of a dog can't bite you. A shadow of a sword cannot hurt you. The shadow of death cannot harm the child of God. Another thing to remember is that in order to have a shadow, you have to have light. You think about that for a little bit. In order to have a shadow, you have to have light. John Phillips, who wrote a commentary on Psalms, he said this. He said, when there is a shadow, there must not only be a substance, there must also be light. It is the light shining on the substance that casts the shadow. This is what makes the difference between the death of a believer and the death of an unbeliever. The unbeliever goes out into the dark. There is reserved for him the blackness of darkness forever. It would be hard to imagine greater horror than to be lost and alone in eternal darkness. The believer, however, goes out into the light. So, Christian, as you see the shadow of death, you need to understand that there's light. That shadow can't hurt you. You get to the point where, as the psalmist says, I will fear no evil. Now imagine that. I will fear no evil. Do you know of some senior saints who have a peace and a calm about them that is hard to understand? They've been there. They've been through the valleys of life. They've been through the difficulties. They've been through the struggles. And when it comes down to it, there's just a calm and a peace about them. Where does that come from? Years of experience? Yeah. Yeah, it does come from years of experience. But it is so much more than that. You know what it is? He says this, for you are with me. Where's the light come from? Jesus is light. And He's with you. As you're going through the valley, and as the shadows are cast, it's because there is light. And if there's light, that means that Jesus is with you. And the psalmist says, for you are with me. I will fear no evil. Why? For you are with me. Man, it makes a difference. I've done several funerals, and to do the funeral of a believer and the funeral of an unbeliever are totally different. It's good to know that God is with me. What makes that even better is knowing who God is. What I mean by that is, do we understand what that means when David wrote, "For you are with me"? You've been with us these past several weeks as we've been looking at this, and you understand how important the shepherd is to the sheep. Sheep are extremely needy. They are helpless. And quite honestly, sheep are dumb. The Bible calls us sheep. Not real flattering. But it's the shepherd that makes sheep valuable. The shepherd's really important. We've been dealing with the question, who is this Jesus? And what we said the very first week is he's our shepherd. He's the good shepherd. He's promised to always be with us. Now think about who David is talking about. When he says the Lord is my shepherd, who's he talking about? He's talking about the one who spoke all creation into existence. That's the one that's his shepherd. He's talking about the one who parted the Red Sea for the Israelites. That's who his shepherd is. When you say the Lord is my shepherd, you are talking about the one who parted the Red Sea. You're talking about the one who gave manna from heaven. You're talking about the one who gave water from a rock. You're talking about the one who rained down fire from heaven on multiple occasions. You're talking about the one who knocked down the walls of Jericho. You're talking about the one who made a donkey talk and an axe head float. Think about that. He's the one who cleansed the leper. He's the one who made the blind see. He's the one who made the lame walk. He's the one who raised the dead. That's who your shepherd is. He's the one who controls the weather and stirs up the ocean. Last night, our phones were going off with all these kinds of weather reports. Severe weather coming our way. You know who's got that? You know who was stirring that up? God was. Our shepherd. He was the one stirring it up. He's the one who makes me lie down in green pastures, and he's the one who leads me beside still water. He's the one who restores my soul and leads me in paths of righteousness. He is the one who is with me as I walk through the valley of life. Our shepherd knows the valley that he leads us through. He created it. Nobody knows it better than he does. He created it. He knows where the dangers are. He also knows where the gentle grazing is. He's our source of strength and courage as we walk through the valley. And as Christians, we will sooner or later discover that it is in the valleys of our lives that we find refreshment from God himself. Man, we're not looking, and when we're in the valleys, we're not looking for a refreshment. We're looking to get out of there. But as you find yourself going through the valleys, you're going to find out that it's in those valleys that God brings refreshment. Even though you're in the valley of the shadow of death, he brings refreshment. It's not until we have walked with him through the deep and dark valleys that we discover that he's able and will lead us to refreshment right in the middle of our storm. There's only the Christian who lives this way, who learns what it means for God to be with us. It is also then that we are able to help others who are weak and in need of encouragement. Some of you have been through some really dark valleys. Some of you have been through the valley of the shadow of death. God did not allow you to go through that valley or take you through that valley without a reason, without a purpose. There's going to be somebody else that you know that's going to go through that very same valley. And God's going to tap you on the shoulder and say, "Do you remember? Do you remember? Go tell them about it." I said this morning in Sunday school, it's the reason why God brings us all together, so that we can encourage one another, so that we can pray for one another. Every person that is here this morning has been brought here for the goodness, for their own good, and for the glorification of God. And the way you glorify God is in the way you live out the Christian life with others that He's put around you. There's going to be some valleys in life for all of us. Some of you may just be coming out of a valley. Some of you may just be coming out of a pretty tough time, pretty difficult time, a valley that you didn't like. You did not enjoy it at all. You wish it would have never come. I'm going to ask you this question. What have you learned? What have you learned? What did God teach you? Were you teachable? What did God teach you so that you could later on encourage somebody else? Some of you may be heading into the dark valley. You know it's coming. You're not looking forward to it. It's been coming for quite some time. What are you going to do? How are you going to handle it? You're going to panic? You're going to hope it goes away? You're going to cry out to God and say, "God, I'm in your hands. I know this is just a shadow. And the only reason there is a shadow is because you're with me, because you are light. It's the only reason I see a shadow." What are you going to do? Some of you may be in the valley right now. Some of you may be in a position right now where you have no idea what you're going to do and how you're going to get out of it. This morning in Sunday school, we talked about be still and know that I'm God. Quite honestly, you may not get out of it. I can tell you this, you're not going to get out of it on your own. John 16:33 tells us, "In this world you will have trouble." Boy, sign me up, man. I can't wait to be a part of the Christian life. As a follower of Jesus, you are going to have trouble. Who wants to come along? But then he says this, "But take heart, because I have overcome the world. And I've promised that I would always be with you. I have already overcome the world. So take heart. You're mine. You're one of my sheep. I'm the shepherd who cares. I'm the shepherd who knows your needs. I'm the shepherd who knows everything you're dealing with. Take heart. Be still and know that I'm God." The question is not how many valleys you have. It's not a contest to see who has the most valleys. We don't want to come here and talk about our valleys all the time and say, "Well, I've got this one, I've got this. Oh, you can't believe what I've got. I've had 5 of them this year." That's not the contest. It's not a contest at all. It does not matter whether those valleys are dark or full of shadows, or just full of shadows. The question is, what are you going to do? How are you going to go through them? How are you going to react when difficult and calamity come your way? Because it will come. Remember this. Even though you may walk through some pretty dark valleys, even the valley of the shadow of death, you can fear nothing, because He is with you. Who is this Jesus? Who is this Jesus that we've been talking about? Well, He's the Creator and sustainer of everything there is. And wherever you may find yourself, He's right there with you. Take heart. He's already overcome the world.